The hidden origin of religions, a spiritual reverse engineering back to the Sumerians. Everything we call religion today, the temples, sacred books, prayers, is only the latest layer of a much older story. Every faith that emerged on earth carries fragments of those that came before. Islam inherited from Christianity. Christianity drank from Judaism. Judaism blossomed over even older myths: Babylonian, Egyptian, Persian, and Sumerian. In this series, we'll walk the path in reverse, stepping back through time until we reach the beginning, when humans first looked up at the sky and named the forces they couldn't understand. We will dismantle religions, reveal their hidden connections, and rediscover the origins of the sacred, because understanding the gods of the past is understanding who we are today. Islam is the youngest among the great monotheistic traditions, yet it claims to be the oldest. Muhammad, its prophet, does not present himself as the founder of a new faith, but as the restorer of the original religion, the one revealed since Adam and passed down through Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. The Quran, Islam's sacred book, claims to continue and correct earlier scriptures. It acknowledges Jewish and Christian prophets, but declares that their messages were altered over time. Thus, Islam isn't born in opposition to Judaism or Christianity. It emerges from within them. It is the most recent echo of an ancient voice speaking of the same God, one, invisible and eternal. Like Judaism, Islam values obedience to divine law. Like Christianity, it speaks of compassion, humility, and forgiveness. But its strength lies in unity, the belief that the entire universe is in submission to the will of God, Allah. Islam, therefore, is the final mirror of a spiritual heritage that has spanned millennia, now expressed in its purest form in the Arabian desert, absolute faith in the One. To understand Islam, we must look beyond the desert and trace the path it walked into the past. Its roots reach deeply into Judaism and Christianity, from which it inherits characters, prophecies, and symbols. The figure of Abraham, the father of faith, is central to all three traditions. In Judaism, he is the founder of the covenant, in Christianity an example of faith, and in Islam, the first Muslim, the man who fully submitted to God's will. The Quran retells biblical stories with its own nuances: Adam and Eve, Noah and the flood, Moses and the Exodus, Jesus and Mary. But unlike Christianity, Jesus is not God here. He is a prophet, a messenger of Allah, whose mission was to prepare the way for Muhammad. This reinterpretation reveals Islam's purpose: to close the cycle, to restore the original monotheism lost across the layers of history. Thus, Islam is a point of return, an attempt to reconnect humanity with the purity of its primordial faith. And if we look deeper, we see that this original faith did not begin with Abraham. It is much older, born in deserts, temples, and sacred rivers of earlier civilizations. And it is there that our journey continues. Christianity was born within the most powerful empire on earth, carrying a promise that sounded impossible: the victory of life over death. At the heart of this faith stands the figure of Jesus, the Christ, the anointed one of God. To Christians, he is the divine Son. To Islam, merely a prophet. But his story echoes something the ancient world already knew. The idea of a God who dies and returns is not new. It is the echo of much older myths. The Egyptians told of Osiris, torn apart and resurrected by Isis. The Greeks venerated Dionysus, also dismembered and returned to life. The Persians honored Mithra, born of a virgin and symbol of the light that conquers darkness. When Christianity emerged, it did not reject these symbols, it reorganized them. The cross became the new axis of the world, the point where the human and divine meet. Bread and wine, ancient symbols of fertility and renewal, became the body and blood of God. Thus, Christianity is reborn from ancient solar religions, uniting them under a single name. a God who dies, only to prove that he never ceased to exist. Christianity began as a marginal movement, a group of fishermen and prophets challenging Caesar's power. But in just a few centuries, it became the religion of the empire itself. When Constantine converted, paganism didn't disappear, it was transformed. Temples to old gods became churches. Pagan feasts, like the winter solstice, received new names: Christmas. Mary, the mother of Jesus, assumed attributes once given to Isis, Cybele, and other mother goddesses. Saints replaced local deities, and ancient symbols took on new meanings: the fish, the lamb, the sun, the cross. Thus, Christianity did not destroy the world that came before. It absorbed it, reorganized it, dressed it in a new spiritual language. Christian theology was born from Hebrew scriptures, but also from Greek philosophy, Stoic ethics, and Eastern rites. It is a perfect fusion of faith, reason, and mystery. Behind the cross, the chants of Egyptian temples still echo, along with Mithraic hymns and Sumerian prayers to the sky god. Christianity, therefore, is the mirror in which ancient religions recognize themselves, the link between the old world and the modern one. And looking at its Jewish roots, we can go deeper still, toward the beginning of the sacred lineage. Judaism is, above all, a covenant, not between nations and kings, but between an invisible God and a nomadic people. In a world filled with images, idols, and bronze statues, the Hebrews dared to worship what could not be seen, carved, or represented. "You shall not make for yourself a carved image," commands the law, marking the start of a unique relationship between humanity and the divine. The God of Israel was not one among many, he was the only one. But this radical idea did not appear out of nowhere. In the beginning, the Hebrews shared the same cultural world as those who worshipped El, Baal, and Asherah, Canaanite gods of sky, storm, and fertility. The difference: for the Hebrews, El became Yahweh, not the greatest of gods, but the only true God. That transformation happened slowly, shaped by history. The exodus from Egypt, the covenant at Sinai, the exile in Babylon. Each trauma, each victory, strengthened faith in a God who walked with his people, not confined to a temple, but alive in memory and law. Thus, Judaism was born, a religion of word, not image, of promise, not power. To understand Judaism, we must understand its greatest weapon: memory. Every feast, every prayer, every page of the Torah is a reminder of who the people of Israel were and who they must continue to be. Unlike Egyptian or Mesopotamian religions that carved the sacred into stone, Judaism wrote it into words. The Torah is not just a book, it is an eternal covenant, a moral and spiritual compass. But even here, echoes of older traditions still resound. The flood of Noah already appeared in the epic of Gilgamesh, thousands of years earlier. The creation of man from clay was taught by the Sumerians. The idea of a lost paradise, guarded by flaming beings, mirrors Mesopotamian myths. Judaism did not copy these stories. It transformed them, placing a single God at the center of the human narrative. That is its true power, turning myth into ethics, legend into law, history into hope. From exile in Babylon came the idea of the Messiah, a future anointed king sent by God to restore justice on earth. This hope would explode in the centuries to come, giving rise to Christianity and deeply influencing Islam. And now, to see where the pillars of this faith came from, it's time to cross into the Persian world, where Zoroaster founded Zoroastrianism. Long before Christianity, Rabbinic Judaism, and Islam, another prophet walked the earth with a message that would forever change the spiritual landscape. His name was Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, and what he proclaimed was not merely faith, but a cosmic battle. He spoke of two eternal principles, Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom, and Angra Mainyu, the spirit of destruction. For the first time, the universe took on an absolute moral structure. Good and evil were not symbolic forces, but real beings, locked in a struggle for the human soul. Life became a choice: serve the light or surrender to darkness. Zoroastrianism introduced ideas that still resonate today: judgment after death, heaven and hell, the resurrection of the dead, the final paradise, and the coming of a savior, the Saoshyant. When the Persians conquered Babylon, the exiled Jews came into direct contact with this religion. There, the Jews stopped seeing evil as mere human rebellion and began to understand it as an autonomous spiritual force. That is where Satan, as an opposing figure, was born, and the promise of a future Messiah began to take clearer shape. The fire of Zarathustra illuminated the horizon of the Abrahamic religions, and still burns within their deepest myths. While empires raised statues and invoked clay gods, Zoroastrianism kept an eternal flame burning, a symbol of purity that could never be extinguished. This fire didn't just brighten altars, it shaped a new spiritual vision in which the fate of the universe depended on the moral choices of each individual. At the heart of this faith stands Ahura Mazda, the god of wisdom, in constant opposition to the evil spirit, Angra Mainyu. For the first time, good and evil weren't just human behaviors, but real, cosmic powers battling for the soul. After death, each person would be judged, crossing the bridge of separation, leading either to the paradise of light or falling into the abyss of darkness. This vision deeply influenced the Jews during their exile in Babylon. It was there that ideas of final judgment, angels, hell, and resurrection took form. Later, Christianity and Islam would inherit this same structure of the afterlife. Zoroaster's flame purified Western faith, forging good and evil into eternal theological pillars. But it was not the only voice to illuminate the mysteries of life and death. Across the desert, the Egyptians also spoke of judgment. But in their vision, the soul wasn't crossing a bridge. It was being weighed against a feather. Before Muhammad, before Moses, before even Zoroaster, Egypt was already dreaming of life after death. For the Egyptians, death was not the end, it was only the beginning of a journey. The human soul, made up of several parts, like the Ka and the Ba, had to cross invisible realms until reaching the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise. But that journey was only possible if the heart was pure. In the Hall of Two Truths, the dead stood before the goddess Mat, embodiment of order and justice. Their heart was placed on a scale, balanced against a feather. If the heart was lighter, a symbol of an honest life, the deceased was welcomed among the gods. If heavy with sin, it was devoured by Amit, the soul eater, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus. This moral judgment, so similar to Zoroastrianism, was born here, on the banks of the Nile, thousands of years earlier. The Egyptians believed justice wasn't human, but cosmic. The order of the universe, Mat, was eternal and divine, and the fate of the soul, just like in Persian Zoroastrianism, was determined by one's own actions. In ancient Egypt, no myth was as powerful as that of Osiris. The god who dies is dismembered and rises again. Betrayed by his brother Set, Osiris was cut into 14 pieces and scattered across the desert. His wife and sister, Isis, gathered each fragment, reassembled the god, and brought him back to life. Thus, Osiris became ruler of the underworld and eternal symbol of resurrection. This cycle of death and rebirth reflected the Nile itself, flooding, receding, and fertilizing Egypt's shores each year. Thousands of years before Christianity, the Egyptians already performed rituals with bread and wine, representing the body and blood of Osiris, believing that, by sharing the god, they could share his victory over death. When Christianity arrived, this archetype resurfaced in new form. Jesus, the God who dies and returns, offering salvation. Resurrection, before it became doctrine, was myth. But the journey didn't begin in Egypt. Long before Osiris, another people told of gods who shaped humans from clay, of floods that destroyed the earth, of an afterlife and divine judgment. It's time to go deeper, to the land where the first myths of humanity were born, ancient Mesopotamia. Long before the pyramids, long before Jerusalem or Mecca, there was a land called Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. Between the Tigris and Euphrates, the first cities were born: Ur, Eridu, Nineveh, Babylon. Here, humanity learned to build, to write, and to imagine the gods. The Mesopotamian religion was as vast as its skies, filled with deities ruling over nature, destiny, fertility, war, and death. Anu, god of the sky; Enlil, lord of the winds; Enki, god of water and wisdom; Inanna, queen of heaven and love, names that would echo later under new disguises. Here, humans wrote, for the first time, a story of how the world was created, inscribed on clay with a reed stylus. Here, the myth of a great flood arose, centuries before Noah built his ark. And here, too, was born the idea that gods molded humans from clay, divine breath animating dust. Everything began in this land, where time took the shape of tablets and prayers took the shape of writing. But the Mesopotamians were not only the first to write, they were the first to imagine the sacred as a mirror of the cosmos. Amid Mesopotamia's fertile plains, the gods were not distant beings. They interfered with the destiny of humanity. It was here that the myths were born that shaped the imagination of the entire ancient world. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, the universe is formed from the body of a defeated goddess, Tiamat, primordial chaos. From the ruins of her body came the heavens, the earth, and humans, molded from clay to serve the gods. Centuries later, this same damp clay would reappear in the book of Genesis when God fashions Adam from the dust of the ground. And the flood that destroys all life in the Bible? It was already told 2,000 years earlier in the Epic of Gilgamesh. There, the hero Utnapishtim builds a boat, saves his family, and releases a dove when the waters recede. Coincidence? No. It is the same narrative flame carried across languages, lands, and empires. It was also in Mesopotamia that the first priests mapped time, charted the stars, and assigned destiny to the heavens, the seed of astrology and cosmic symbolism. And if Judaism inherited ethical monotheism, it was here it inherited its oldest myths. But before the Babylonians, before kings and cities, there was a people even older who first named the gods and the dreams. Before the pharaohs, before the prophets, before even the tablets of law, there was a people who built the first cities, raised the first temples, and wrote the first myths of humanity. They were called the Sumerians, and they lived in the southern land of Sumer. Here, the gods had form, name, and function. Anu, god of the sky; Enlil, lord of the winds; Enki, god of the waters and creation; Inanna, the morning star, queen of love and war. These gods walked among men and shaped their destiny. To serve them, the Sumerians built monumental stepped temples, ziggurats, ancestors of the sacred towers that would later echo in Babel and the altars of Jerusalem. It was among these temples that human beings invented writing, cuneiform, and with it, the first stories of creation, flood, and life after death. Long before Adam, a man named Adapa received divine wisdom but not immortality. Long before Noah, a hero named Ziusudra survived a flood sent by the gods. And long before Moses, Sumerian priests carved sacred laws into stone. But how were these myths born? To understand, we must descend even deeper into the original clay of humanity. In the temples of Sumer, it wasn't humans who invented myths. It was myth that invented humans. Here arose the earliest stories that would shape the spiritual future of the world. In Enki and Ninmah, gods shape human beings from clay and breathe life into them. a story that would travel millennia until it reached the book of Genesis, where God forms Adam from the earth. The myth of Zoroaster, who survives a divine flood, was carved on tablets almost 2,000 years before Noah braved the waters. In Inanna's descent into the underworld, the goddess passes through 7 gates, dies, and returns to life. The first resurrection myth echoed countless times afterward. The idea of a stairway or tower linking heaven and earth also began here. The ziggurat was an architectural symbol of the very connection between divine and human realms. Each of these Sumerian myths passed through Babylon, Egypt, the Levant, Persia, and infiltrated the religions we now call revealed. Before Abraham, before Moses, before Jesus and Muhammad, there were the scribes of Sumer, inscribing the first version of the eternal onto clay. And when we look back, we see that what we call faith began as memory written in the earth. From Islam back to Sumer, we walked the path of faith in reverse. We found that behind every prophet lies an older myth. Behind every doctrine, a forgotten symbol. The fire of Zoroaster burned in the light of the pyramids. Mot's judgment echoed on the narrow bridge of the Persian afterlife. Noah's flood flowed from the epic of Gilgamesh, and the God who dies and rises was reborn as many times as the grain buried in the ground. All religions, from the youngest to the oldest, draw from the same deep waters. The human need to give meaning to life, death, and the unseen. Faith did not fall from heaven. It rose from the earth, from clay, from fear, from love. And the gods we shaped with our hands ended up shaping who we are. At the end of this journey, we do not find a throne in the skies, but a mirror. Religion, like civilization, is living memory. And every time someone asks, "Where do we come from?" that memory awakens. Our journey ends here, but the mystery continues.
I will reveal the forbidden wisdom.